I want to see this Game Ranks thing though, because I've also been wondering what's going on with PC ports. My understanding is that a lot of this is tied up into specifically like optimization priorities. PC is just lower on the list compared to console stuff, and so it's going to be interesting to see what they claim is actually going on here.
Back in 2015, Warner Brothers released Batman Arkham Knight on PS4, Xbox One, and PC. The PC version was unique at the time in that it was an absolute train wreck at a time when the PC version of a game was always considered to be the best version. That is not how
It was always considered to be I don't think that's true at all. PC ports have always had troubles, like going back pretty far. So I don't know if that was like that novel of a thing in 2015. One of the weird things about Batman Arkham Knight though is that it looked so amazing on console, and then the PC version specifically, even though you could have way more powerful hardware, a way more expensive PC, it not only ran terribly, but it also was just really, really ugly. There were a lot of weird things about it. We found out after the fact that most of the problems related to, or I guess tied up in the Batman Arkham Knight debacle was because they hired an outside company to do it. So Rocksteady did not make the PC port. They hired another company like Iron Gate Studios or something, to go and port the game from console over. And you could say some of the blame still falls on Warner Brothers and Rocksteady because they shouldn't have allowed it to release in that state. They could have said that, you know, who knows, maybe Rocksteady wasn't giving them the support they needed in order to properly port it, or maybe they were just bad at porting games to PC. Who knows? But there were a lot of pieces to the puzzle of that Arkham Knight disaster launch on PC, because that's one of those things. People still have the perception that Arkham Knight is like kind of buggy and broken on PC. It's way better. It's definitely not as good as it could be, but it's certainly way better now. But that launch really screwed them up.
Things are anymore. In the 7 years that have passed since then, the idea of the PC version of the game being the best version has evaporated into thin air. It's gone. Instead, we are really seeing tons of issues when we play games on PC nowadays. So, well, let's just get into it. Hi folks, it's Falcon, and today on Game Ranks, we asked the question, what...
His voice sounds different. Did he like change his microphone or something? Because I thought like maybe this is the Falcon guy. His voice sounds different. Am I wrong? I don't know. Maybe I remember it differently. But it sounds way different. He used to be kind of a little bit lower, and he would talk like he just ate a gallon of molasses. I don't really know what. Maybe he has a cold. Maybe. Well, to me, it's the delivery. He seems more energetic. I kind of like it, but he seems to be more like hyped up. So I'll give him that.
What the hell is going on with PC ports? So, I'm not necessarily sure I would call Arkham Knight our flashpoint for this issue. Although, it's a nice little trip down memory lane if you want to go back to our very first Before You Buy, where Jake reviewed the console version of the game and mentioned the whole controversy with the PC one, but was pretty safely nestled away in the good version of the game, where PC games became a big business again, and they intentionally developed games side by side with one another on PC and consoles with the intent to do well on both. Arkham Knight actually came out during this era, and generally, PC ports I don't think were at their worst. But if one can remember back to the 90s, things looked a lot more similar to how they do now. Back in those days, PC architecture and console architecture was completely different.
Am I wrong? I thought the like height of console PC problems was like the PS3 generation. Because if I remember correctly, the PS3 specifically had a really strange architecture tied into its like CPU, APU thing, and it made it a nightmare to code for. That's one of the reasons that a lot of like Bethesda games have really weird bugs, specifically on PlayStation, because their engine wasn't calibrated correctly for it, and there's remnants of that still permeating through the Creation Engine. So I would have thought it's the PS3 gen, but maybe there's like some statistical thing. It would be cool to see if he has like stats or like a spreadsheet where he can break down like these are all the games, major AAA games that launched during this period each year, and then these are the ones with the Metacritic score of the PC port at launch versus the console port, and then we're going to take the delta and compare it. So the bigger the delta is in the year on average, the worse the PC ports were during that year, and then you could look at which years were worse and figure that out. But I'm guessing, because most people don't have like that level of OCD or try-hardness with their videos, I'm guessing most of this is going to just be kind of like anecdotal little tidbits and points.
An Intel Pentium was nothing like a Sega Genesis, which was running on a Motorola processor dropped into an adaptation of Sega's System 16 arcade board, or Super Nintendo, which was just an entirely custom processor built by Nintendo. In fact, this was basically the problem with PC ports up through the PS3 and the Xbox 360. The fact was, consoles and PC were just fundamentally different things. So it made sense that Sonic 3 and Knuckles on PC, the original port, was terrible, because every PC port from a console game was terrible. But sometime in that Xbox 360 PS3 era, developers were just like, you know what, PCs are better, and these consoles suck to develop on. Let's make the PC version better. And we actually saw that a fair amount. Still, when a game would come out on consoles first, like, say, Dead Space back in 2008, apparently. Wow. I know we talked about the Dead Space remake a bunch recently, but I always forget how old that game is because it just holds up so well. Still.
It really does. It really does. We, except for it does have a ton of issues with the PC port, ironically enough, where if you have like VSync turned on in your display settings, then you have like animation timings and like game logic break. So like we tried playing Dead Space the original on stream here right before the remake came out, and I had like, I still am not totally sure what went wrong, but I think it was because I had VSync turned on in the NVIDIA control panel, because I do this like screen cloning thing where my monitor here is cloned with an HDMI out on my graphics card, which goes to the capture card that lets you see it. And because I had that thing turned on, game logic would break. So you'd go through a doorway, and then there was supposed to be like an enemy attacking this NPC, and that just wouldn't trigger. So you would just soft lock yourself, all because you had VSync turned on. So like this still is a thing. It's really, really interesting. Dead Space physics engine breaks if it's more than 30 FPS. Well, like we swapped over, we played it on the Xbox Series S I have over here, and that worked fine. It was definitely way grainier, but the backwards compatibility layer fixed a lot of the problems. But yeah, speaking of PC port issues, that's still a thing.
The PC version of that was exemplary of the problems of PC ports of console-only games because, well, basically had to just make the game again. How many people have ever played GTA 4 on PC? There are guides, not to how to beat the game. Like, these walkthroughs are not about playing the game. They're about letting you play the game. Seriously, guides for getting the game to run smoothly on a modern PC. This is a game that came out like 15 years ago for just vastly inferior hardware. But that was the PS3, Xbox 360 era. When the PS...
Yeah, it's... And Rockstar's always been bad about this. They still are bad about this. That port, you guys remember the Red Dead Redemption 2 port to PC also had some issues. And while it's, I think, better now, they fixed a lot of it. I think that game, you know, it took them, what, a year and a half to get that PC port out? It took them a while.
4 and the Xbox One came out with much more similar architecture to PCs. The PS4 and the Xbox One both had x86 CPU architecture, which basically makes them not far from being a PC. I mean, it doesn't make them PCs, but the similarities are much more vast. Like, the thing that makes a PS3 similar to a PC is that they are electronics. They have CPUs. But once you get into the actual mechanics of how they work, they're actually pretty different on a functional level, inside the chips. That stopped with the PS4 and the Xbox One. For a while, I don't think this was actually to the detriment of PC gaming. In fact, I think it actually provided a bit of an argument for prioritizing PC development. Hey, we can make the game on PC and then just sort of adapt to the specific hardware of these two consoles and strip back without having to do a whole lot in terms of code. I'm definitely oversimplifying to some extent, but it's a lot closer to that than in the previous console generations. That being said, although I'm sure that tons of executives that don't know what they're talking about heard that type of simplification and thought, well, that's it. All of our problems have been solved. There are still differences between consoles and PC.
And I just to be clear, I think that's what some developers still do. My understanding is that that's basically how CD Projekt Red put together Cyberpunk 2077. They developed it for PC first, and then everything else was kind of ported after. Pieces were torn away in order to get it working. Kind of like, I guess building a crazy cool house or something, and then like as you apply that overall structure, or like maybe a good example, I've been playing a lot of Kerbal Space Program, so like in Kerbal Space Program you have a blueprint for a crazy elaborate ship, and you just plop that ship in to every project you're about to take on, and then you strip away pieces of it based on what you actually need for the mission or you're trying to do, because you're like, oh, I'm only going to the Mun, I don't need a 5-stage rocket, I'll just strip this down a little bit and level it out. But you started with it built out to the max. And my understanding is some developers still do that. The problem is sometimes people push too hard, and then, dear God Almighty, you run into problems like with Cyberpunk, where the game looks great on PC when it's working, but on console, like the PS4 and Xbox One versions, it's like hilariously horrible because they kind of overshot to the point where it wasn't really feasible to pull it back all the way.
Probably the most notable one is how memory works. Now, I'm not going to dive too deep into it, but the key here is that PCs have both dedicated system memory and
dedicated WAM? Do they have dedicated WAM? Oh, dude, that guy's a gem.
And VRAM as well. What makes that different from a console is that consoles just got memory, man. There is no dedicated memory in a console. All of the memory is used by all of the things. So in terms of development, this is a pretty major difference. So a PC having more memory total doesn't necessarily make it better at running something that was written for a console. In fact, due to the split nature of its RAM, actually has a little bit of extra work. When you've got two sets of memory, you gotta figure out where everything is gonna go. And a lot of the time, something needs to go to both places at different times. So, once again, we have two diverging sets of code, the PC version and the console one. Keeping in mind that having the x86 architecture still makes it vastly more similar than at any time in the past. So here's where I start to think that it gets really interesting. You would think that consoles moving to the x86 architecture would make people think, well, we can do the PC version and scale down. It kind of seems to have had the opposite effect, and now it seems like there are a lot more games that are developed console first and scaled up. More like the 1990s, like I said, coming full circle, things are more like then, albeit for different reasons. I would say it's because the consoles, for one, there's a lot of consoles out there. I don't know if it's fair to say that the majority of revenue for a lot of these companies are coming from PC ports, but maybe in some cases it is. Nobody's doubting that or calling into question PlayStation's choice to develop for PS5 first and then bring it to PC after the fact. Of course, that makes sense. But in the case of like, a Rockstar doing cross-console stuff or cross-platform stuff, or a like Activision situation, that's where this more comes into question.
So I don't know. It's interesting. It's a good question. I don't know. I don't know.
Technically different reasons. If you want to talk about what's really driving it, it's all business. In the 1990s, they were developing things on the console first because they were going to sell more games on the consoles, and the PC was such a different architecture, it was kind of an afterthought. Now, when the architecture is so similar, they've gone through a couple of cycles where they've rethought this stuff and then arrived back at the conclusion, we sell more copies of the games on the consoles, so we should develop there first. And somebody's going to interpret that as it's corporate greed, man. And anybody who's paid any degree of attention to me over the years I've been involved in Game Ranks, you know my opinion on corporate greed. I don't think I need to justify what I'm about to say by reminding you specifically about what I've said in the past, but I actually kind of don't think it's corporate greed.
Okay. I'm in. I will say the moment I hear somebody go corporate greed, I immediately just assume they probably don't know what they're talking about. Because it's like the boogeyman. It's like the easiest way that you can try to get some free brownie points in a discussion is like, corporate greed. It's like, well, I mean, if most of your customers are on PlayStation, how is it greedy in any way to prioritize development of that version of the game for the majority of your customers? Like it's just practical. It just makes sense. Like I don't see how that's tied up in greed. Well, because they want more money from those customers. Okay, yeah, they're providing their customers a product that the customer wants. Nobody's forcing you to buy the game, but these people want the game on PlayStation, so they buy it on PlayStation. Them providing a good PlayStation port, I don't think it's an example of corporate greed. Like, it's an example of the free market working of corporations, like providing you a better quality service in exchange for more money, you know?
This is a very practical decision. The fact is, a PC, although much more powerful, much more flexible, and capable of so many different things, it's not a gaming machine, and a gaming console is. That being said, I PC game.
I'll have you know, the Xbox One was so much more. A cable box. It was your center for TV. It was everything. The Xbox One, man. You remember those OG Xbox Ones? They had the little cable port, the coax port on the back you'd have to screw in because it was built to be basically a cable box. So, yeah, this is true of gaming consoles, to be clear, except for the Xbox One because that thing was a joke.
More than I do console game now at this point in my life. I prefer it, and I think that it's better. But practically speaking, it makes perfect sense that the consoles are being prioritized. Why? Because there's 3 sets of hardware. 2 if you're talking the ones that actually have any beef whatsoever. The Switch really is not a beefy console at this point. But what?
Well, it's not a beefy console, and it's not even trying to run current gen stuff. Nintendo usually is pretty comfortable with being the portable last gen gaming machine. But let's be real, you're mainly buying Nintendo consoles for Nintendo first party games or Nintendo exclusives. Which, to be clear, I've said this before about Breath of the Wild. I would happily buy, like, if I had not gotten any other games for the Switch and I had only gotten Breath of the Wild for the Switch, I still think that package for $360 or whatever with tax it was, I think that still was worth it. Like, I loved Breath of the Wild so much, I would have been willing to pay $400 to play it. I would just happen to also get a lot of other games, you know, Mario Party and Mario Kart and Smash Bros and Fire Emblem and all of those as well. But, you know, that's just because their first party games are so good. As for, yeah, even the GameCube was portable. Yeah, it had a handle. You could take it anywhere. We like to empower our players to take the gaming experience everywhere. So dumb. Can you imagine if they release a PlayStation 5 Pro or whatever, and it's got like a fold-out handle so you can carry it like a suitcase? Dude, I love that. That'd be amazing. Oh, goodness. Anyway, but yeah, I'm with Falcon here. I think that corporate greed talking point is so dumb. Like sometimes it's true. Sometimes, like I've said this before with Activision stuff with Call of Duty. Activision to me, like I think you could say that the constant break in the meta for Activision Call of Duty Warzone 2, I think that that is an example of corporate greed. I think you can explain the meta constantly breaking, guns constantly becoming overpowered, blah, 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 through and by means of greed. Because they are, like, whenever a meta comes about, like you guys might remember, like a couple of years ago, the Gallantry, which was the little Mac 10. The skinned version of the Gallantry of the Mac 10 gave inordinate boosts to stability. It like would literally break and it would go off of the chart. And so if you wanted to be able to compete at all in Warzone for the like 2 month or 2 weeks that that was the meta, you needed to have that blueprint. And guess what? It just so happened to be in the store for like $15 or whatever. So you could get it, or you could just not have fun for 2 weeks and get like squashed. Same with like, you know, if you guys remember DMR Zone, that whole trend, that whole meta, where for like a while the DMR was, it just broke the game. And guess what? It was available as a blueprint in the store. So if you wanted to play and be even slightly competitive and join all of those all of the people playing with those broken guns, you could do that for a low price of $10 or $20 for the kit. So I think you could explain the fact stuff is constantly breaking by way of corporate greed of, hey, we can just break the game intentionally and we can write it all the way to the bank. Like easy peasy. And they won't do anything about it. You know, so I think that this is occasionally a correct answer, but I don't know how you would possibly say like prioritizing console development is actually like an example of corporate greed. So I agree with Falcon on this.
When you make a game for the PlayStation 5 or the Xbox Series, you are locked to specifications. The hardware is the same in every PlayStation 5. When you design a game for the PlayStation 5, there's little quirks and eccentricities that all interact with each other and allow you to eke out certain performance gains in certain areas, and there's certain detriments that you have to avoid in certain ways. And it will always be the same on that hardware. Even when they release the PlayStation 5 Plus, it's gonna be compatible hardware that's a little bit better. All the same stuff is still gonna apply. It is not a radically different configuration, and no matter how much more powerful PCs are, the number of configurations that exist in PC gaming is staggering. It's probably not countable. It's that high, compared to one for the PlayStation 5.
And obviously this is true, but my understanding is that it's never been easier for developers to scale stuff, since now it's pretty much all tied up in NVIDIA and AMD. I guess Intel you could count as a GPU manufacturer now, but let's be real, not many gamers are using Intel stuff. So that's all tied up there. So in terms of drivers and scalability, it's all pretty straightforward. This is true, but I think this has always been true. There's something that I hate. You can't change settings on consoles. Like, I get having a limit, but let me change the resolution down or other things to get more frames, for example. I think it's just the moment that you start doing that, you're introducing instability. It's the same reason why iPhones don't let you do whatever you want and customize it the same way you can do with a Samsung, like, or just an Android, just in general. And it's because, like, part of the experience you get on an iPhone is this locked down, consistent performance that you would expect from an Apple product. Whereas on an Android device, they kind of are like, yeah, no, have fun. You can customize it to your heart's content or break it. It's up to you. And on PC, it's the same thing. Like, if you want to crank the game at 8K with like full ray tracing and run at 2 FPS, you can do that. But on consoles, there's sort of a weird, not a weird, it's like sort of an assumption that if you play a console version, it will run well. Maybe not great, it won't look amazing compared to the PC port, but it will run well. It will be stable. That's console versus PC. Think of PC like Android and iPhone like consoles.
2 for the Xbox Series. You have the S and the X. And eventually you're going to throw in the upgraded versions of both of these consoles. But still, you can count it on a single hand. Unless you have a spreadsheet and understand
I'm still
formulas,
pissed about
it's
Wild Hearts.
unlikely you're even going to be able to figure out how many different configurations there are in the PC gaming world. I don't know if you can. I really don't. I'm not going to try, personally. It's not important information. But just from the perspective of shaders, according to Wikipedia, a shader is a computer program that calculates the appropriate levels of light, darkness, and color for the rendering of a 3D scene. Shaders tend to be different based on GPU rendering pipelines, so hey, how many different GPUs are there in the various consoles? One, the shader's gonna be the damn same all the time on a console game. So guess what you do? You write a shader that's compatible with that console. Granted, you're probably going to write different shaders for different locations because in terms of environmental effects, things are often different in different places in the game. But those shaders are all going to be written for the same graphics pipeline and don't require any kind of adaptation. Shaders, on the other hand, for the PC, have to continually be adapted for different configurations. So a PC game is continually recompiling shaders as you visit new areas in a game.
On consoles, shaders are compiled directly to native GPU instructions during the build, which means they are ready for use rendering as soon as they are in memory. However, on PC, the variability of hardware means shaders have to be compiled by the local driver. This can be very expensive operation, so just like with buffers and textures, care has to be taken when creating them during gameplay, which is exactly the problem like that Callisto Protocol, Hogwarts Legacy had this a little bit, though they fixed it with a patch that compiles all of it. I think that was the day one patch actually, but the best examples of this would probably be Gotham Knights and Callisto Protocol recently. Both games that didn't pre-compile shaders on launch day on PC, which is why you would just be playing the game and the moment anything new happened on screen, it would stutter and freeze. Really spoiled any sort of jump scare in Callisto Protocol, because like something would be happening and then it would just freeze while it compiled the shader and then it would happen. It was really stupid.
Game. That is, of course, work being done that could be done doing anything else. Now, in a perfect world, budgets and deadlines would be set up so that the version of the game that comes out for each platform is the best it can possibly be at launch. As we know, that is not how things go, even when a game is only released on PC or only released on consoles. We are very often seeing games released in incomplete states. So when you have a game exist across these two different paradigms, the one that's most likely to make the most money, generally the one that is geared specifically towards the function of playing a game, is going to be the one that gets the attention first. And I don't want that to read as a defense, however, because frankly, I think we're all fed up with both of the issues I just talked about. A, incomplete games being released, and B, PC ports of games coming out and sucking. Like, I think that people are actually starting to get to a point where it's too much. And as game budgets get bigger and scope expands, the question I feel like we're starting to ask isn't, hey, can you stop delaying the games? Like it has been in the past. Like, delays have started to get pretty irritating. The question we're starting to ask more is, hey, executives, can you give the damn developers enough time so that all of the versions of the game that we get are completed before we get them? Like, I did the before you buy on Wild Hearts, which is a fantastic game that exhibits both of these issues hard. And it's a big enough slap in the face that the game was basically released incomplete everywhere. But for those of us who would prefer to play the game on PC, myself included, we get a special level of bad. Again, not bad in terms of the game. I'd had nothing but praise for this game. It's just, this has become such a standard, normal issue for multi-platform releases. And I know at this point, this is kind of just a rant, but any developers or publishers, especially any executives who happen to be watching this, I think you could really engender a lot of goodwill by simply carving out timetables for development that allow you to give the PC port enough attention that it's good. At least as good as the console version. But then that brings us into the whole unfinished game issue, which is, it goes beyond this, obviously. Let's use this issue as a start point for our conversations in the comment section, though. If you like this video...
I mean, so I also, one of the other boogeymen of the gaming industry is the executives. And let me be clear, there are a lot of executives out there who are just steaming piles of garbage that walk around in $5,000 suits. You won't hear me like defending those types, absolutely. Well, I guess let me just say that, like, I think it's a little more nuanced than just the executives. Like, you have to be a little bit more precise, because like Wild Hearts was published by EA, but it was developed by Koei Tecmo, right? And it launched like super broken on PC, super broken. So the question is, was it Koei Tecmo that put the game out and said, yeah, no, we'll be ready for launch on this date, and it just wasn't? Or was it the publisher that caused problems? Was it EA that pushed them a little too hard? Was it like, where does the blame land? And maybe part of it is just miscommunication. That could be part of it. I was speaking actually yesterday with somebody who's a developer with Ubisoft, actually, for an upcoming video. And what was interesting was that he basically blamed working from home, like work remote, which is something that started during COVID. And it was kind of an interesting thing that I hadn't really thought a lot about. But basically what he said was that he felt as though the problems with all of these releases and why games keep releasing buggy was because communication is at a really inconsistent level, and productivity has also dropped significantly. So developers and studio managers and people are saying, oh, we need 6 months usually to do this type of thing. And then they get 6 months in and they're like, oh, we're not actually done with it now, but we guaranteed we'd be done at 6 months. So oops, we're behind schedule and now the game's going to launch buggy. And he's saying that's because productivity dropped. And he thinks it's mainly because of work remote. He's like, if I need to go and well, can I say this without, I think this would apply to most people, so I'll just say it. But he said, like, back when we were in the studio in place, there would be times where like he needed to go and check with a member of the coding team on something. So he would get up from his desk, walk over to the coding team and have a quick 5-10 minute conversation, and then they would do that, figure out what they needed to figure out, and then he'd go back to his desk and keep doing what he was doing. And he said that type of collaborative environment now in a lot of studios around the world is not really a thing. People just work remote. So if you want to communicate with somebody, yes, on paper, yes, you can, in theory, just hop on a Slack call or chat with them and do that. And I guess achieve the same ends, but he said it's just fundamentally different. The collaborative environment is just, it's important to game development and to putting these things together. And that's kind of where, like, when I was working in real estate, I will say that, you know, we had the lockdowns around that time, and we were all way more productive when we were in the office. Way more. Like, we could quantify it. We could see on the stat page how many like cold calls and meetings were set up, how many deals got done. When we were in person, in office, the whole team was more productive. Even though working from home, we could do all of the same stuff. If we needed to talk to our boss, we could just call them real quick. We could also go, and if we needed to negotiate a contract, we could do that remote. If we needed to cold call people, we could do that remote. You know, there were all these things that you could just do while working from home, but when you were in the office, you just were flat out more productive. And I know it's not like a super popular thing. Terrell, thank you. It's going to read in a second, but it's not popular to say work remote leads to less productivity,
super chatted $4
but I'm sold on it.
Oh, the autoplay went to a live video.
Oh, that's funny.
I'm at work listening. I didn't notice tears of joy.
Well, I'm glad you made it. Accidentally or not, I'm glad you're here. Some employees are a bit liberal on work hours when home is in the mix. I think so. I just, and again, it's sort of a hot button issue because people really like working from home. And I'm saying this as somebody who likes working from home. Okay. I totally understand it. However, I honestly don't think it's that scandalous a thing to say, to just acknowledge that working in an office space or with your coworkers in person will lead to greater productivity than when you are at home. At least in certain businesses. Like, I'm sure other stuff, it's not actually that big of a difference and it doesn't really matter with certain industries and things. Like if you're working in finance and you just need to like evaluate stock tickers or something, then yeah, you can do that from home and who cares? Like, it's not a big deal. But yeah, I just think that might have a lot to do with not just the delays, but also with the buggy state that a lot of things have launched in, where productivity's probably just dropped and they have to get these games out, so they put it out, you know?
He took my thing. Red